The world paused, headlines screamed, social media erupted, and ordinary Americans felt a chill run down their spines. 10,000 U.S. troops could be headed to the Middle East. One breaking alert flashed, bold and unforgiving. Instantly, speculation took flight. Families imagined loved ones being sent into an unfamiliar desert, political pundits spun ominous scenarios, and markets jumped in chaotic reaction. In the blur of uncertainty, one question burned hotter than any headline: was the United States on the brink of another massive conflict? Every moment felt heavy with tension, like a storm gathering unseen strength. Yet as quickly as the report surfaced, the atmosphere shifted, leaving fear and curiosity mingling in every conversation. The announcement was enough to make the entire nation hold its breath, hearts pounding in unison, wondering if history was about to repeat itself. But the truth behind the headlines was far more intricate, a web of rumor, denial, and strategic maneuvering that would challenge what Americans believed about power, responsibility, and truth. Beneath the cacophony of media panic lay a story that mattered deeply, not just in political terms but in human ones. Every speculative headline carried with it implications that touched lives: parents worrying about children, communities debating the morality of intervention, and citizens grappling with the very definition of America's role on the world stage. The timing of the report could not have been more consequential. Global tensions had been simmering for months. Every move in the Middle East now felt magnified, each whisper of troop movements a spark that might ignite broader conflict. Social media amplified anxiety, serving as both a megaphone and a magnifying glass for every rumor, every imagined scenario. The nation felt poised on a knife's edge, teetering between rational caution and collective hysteria. And in this moment, the story transcended policy or strategy. It became a test of American values, a reflection of how the country sees itself in times of crisis. It began with the reports, of course. Multiple outlets published alarming stories. The Pentagon was considering sending 10,000 troops to the region. Analysts dissected maps and timelines, projecting possible deployment patterns, potential targets, and the costs involved. Critics and commentators framed the report as evidence of reckless ambition, a sign of arrogance and disregard for international consequences. The narrative of escalation dominated the airwaves, portraying the U.S. as a force prepared to impose power abroad with little accountability. Imagined voices of families, service members, and ordinary citizens filtered through every paragraph: the worried parent reading the news before breakfast, the young soldier grappling with the uncertainty of deployment, the expatriate living halfway around the world following reports with bated breath. The story created an antagonist almost out of thin air, a hypothetical villainous escalation that threatened peace, security, and stability. With each new analysis, the tension heightened, making the nation feel simultaneously vulnerable and powerless, caught between rumor and reality. And then, the Pentagon spoke. Their statement was concise, measured, and deliberate. The United States was not finalizing plans to send any additional troops. The denial was precise, yet in its calmness lay dramatic weight. In that press briefing, amid flashing cameras and scribbling reporters, the Pentagon assumed the role of the hero, the institution tasked with providing clarity in a storm of speculation. Words were chosen carefully, balancing the need for transparency with the strategic imperative of not revealing sensitive operational details. For some, this was relief incarnate; for others, a cautious pause, a reminder that clarity is often partial, filtered, and contingent. The contrast was stark: on one side, the fevered imagination of global panic; on the other, the steady, reasoned voice of authority attempting to restore calm. Yet even this heroic intervention could not immediately contain the ripple effects of the report, nor quell the growing chatter that the world, whether through intention or accident, had already shifted. Rumors, once unleashed, are hard to contain. As the Pentagon's denial spread, the global conversation became increasingly fractious. Social media platforms erupted with commentary, speculation, and skepticism. Some questioned whether the denial masked hidden intentions; others lauded it as a victory for truth. Online communities divided into factions: hawks insisting the U.S. would act despite statements, progressives calling for diplomacy, peace activists urging caution. The digital sphere became a stage where ideas and emotions collided, a narrative battleground as intense as any physical conflict. Each post, each tweet, each share carried weight, shaping perceptions and heightening drama. For ordinary viewers, the story was no longer merely about troop movements. It had evolved into a test of discernment, a reflection of how information, authority, and public reaction intertwine in the modern age. And in this evolving narrative, the tension between rumor and reality became the defining antagonist. Meanwhile, the international repercussions unfolded with dramatic immediacy. Allies and adversaries alike reacted to both the report and the denial. NATO partners scrutinized communications, debating the seriousness of potential deployment. Middle Eastern nations interpreted every signal, weighing the possibility of escalation against regional stability. Iran, in particular, appeared to monitor the situation closely, with state media and government officials offering subtle commentary designed to signal caution without provocation. Beyond governments, ordinary civilians experienced the anxiety acutely. Oil traders watched markets swing dramatically, families followed news updates obsessively, and soldiers read headlines with apprehensive anticipation. The world, in effect, became a stage for the consequences of misinformation and interpretation, highlighting the delicate balance between power, perception, and reality. Every action, every word, and every silence contributed to an evolving narrative whose stakes were extraordinarily high. As the story developed, the deeper implications became clear. The Pentagon's denial, while ostensibly definitive, raised questions about transparency, strategy, and trust. Could such denials fully reassure the public, or were they merely tactical, aimed at controlling perception? Critics argued that ambiguity in policy communication could undermine confidence, creating space for misinterpretation and rumor. Conversely, supporters contended that the careful balancing act between secrecy and clarity is essential in maintaining national security. Here, the drama intensified not through action but through the clash of ideas: trust versus skepticism, clarity versus ambiguity, authority versus public discernment. The narrative transformed from a simple question of troop numbers into a reflection of broader democratic values, the responsibilities of leadership, and the moral imperative to communicate truthfully in times of uncertainty. At the human level, the story resonated with profound emotional intensity. Veterans, activists, families, and citizens found themselves invested in the narrative not only politically but personally. The notion of deployment, even hypothetical, invoked empathy for service members and their families. The fear of escalation touched core values: the desire for justice, the longing for peace, and the commitment to civic responsibility. As viewers processed each development, they were drawn into a cinematic arc of tension, revelation, and reflection. Hero and villain were no longer abstract concepts. They became tangible in the actions of institutions, the statements of leaders, and the reactions of ordinary people. The emotional journey mirrored that of a tightly scripted drama, suspenseful, urgent, and deeply human. The culmination of these dynamics produced a turning point. The Pentagon's clarification, when contextualized against media speculation and public response, highlighted the complexities inherent in modern governance. It emphasized the challenge of navigating truth in an environment saturated with information, perception, and emotion. The narrative revealed the importance of discernment, the value of patience, and the ethical responsibility of leadership. In this light, the story became inspirational rather than merely alarming. It offered a lens through which citizens could understand the interplay between rumor, authority, and consequence, encouraging proactive engagement and critical thinking. The audience was no longer passive. They became participants in an unfolding drama that demanded reflection, insight, and moral courage. From there, the story's resolution emphasized universal values that resonate across ideological lines, while speaking directly to a progressive audience: the imperative of dignity, the need for transparency, the moral weight of restraint, and the centrality of empathy in public discourse. By framing the Pentagon as a stabilizing force and positioning misinformation and rumor as antagonistic elements, the narrative underscored the triumph of clarity, truth, and reason over chaos and fear. At the same time, the story reinforced the importance of identity, community, and shared responsibility, highlighting the ways in which civic awareness and ethical engagement can influence both perception and policy. This thematic crescendo delivered not only closure but also inspiration, leaving the audience with a renewed sense of empowerment and purpose. In the aftermath, social validation reinforced the story's impact. Online platforms reflected the emotional stakes through hashtags, threads, and viral commentary. Influencers, journalists, and ordinary citizens contributed to a collective sense of vigilance and engagement, each post amplifying the narrative while shaping perception. Memes, tweets, and discussions illustrated the democratic power of information dissemination, emphasizing that the audience is both witness and participant in the broader drama. This layer of social proof added depth and texture, reinforcing the cinematic arc while maintaining engagement and investment. Each reaction, each interpretation, and each interaction contributed to a narrative ecosystem in which meaning, drama, and moral clarity were constantly negotiated. As the story closed, the moral resolution crystallized. The potential deployment of 10,000 troops, real or rumored, became a catalyst for reflection on civic responsibility, national identity, and ethical governance. The narrative emphasized that true heroism lies not in dramatic displays of power but in measured clarity, ethical leadership, and a commitment to transparency. The villainy in the story, represented by rumor, panic, and unchecked speculation, was countered not through confrontation but through reasoned communication and civic engagement. The audience was invited to consider their role as informed citizens, advocates for truth, and participants in the moral arc of society. In this framing, the story transcended immediate news and entered the realm of cultural and civic narrative, providing both dramatic satisfaction and ethical instruction. Finally, the call to action reinforced the script's progressive, identity-driven ethos. Viewers were encouraged to share verified information, engage critically with media, and uphold principles of justice, empathy, and community responsibility. The narrative invited the audience to see themselves as active participants in the ongoing dialogue between rumor and reality, fear and reason, speculation and truth. In doing so, it completed a full cinematic arc, opening with shock, escalating through conflict and tension, revealing clarity, and concluding with inspiration and empowerment. The story left the audience not only informed but motivated, capable of reflecting on the broader implications of media, governance, and civic engagement. The weight of responsibility, both in governance and citizenship, became the final takeaway. In a world where rumors can escalate faster than facts, where headlines shape perception before clarity can intervene, the audience was reminded that discernment, empathy, and civic vigilance are essential. The narrative had transformed a single news report into a sweeping arc of drama, reflection, and moral insight. Americans were invited to witness, evaluate, and participate, understanding that their engagement shapes not only public discourse but also the trajectory of democracy itself. Through suspense, heroism, and ethical reflection, the story affirmed that clarity, courage, and moral integrity are the true measures of leadership. In conclusion, the report of 10,000 troops and the Pentagon's denial were more than news items. They were catalysts for civic reflection, ethical deliberation, and identity-driven engagement. By framing the narrative in cinematic terms, emphasizing hero versus villain dynamics, and threading suspense, emotional resonance, and inspiration throughout, the story achieved a dual purpose: it informed and it inspired. It reminded viewers that truth requires courage to uncover, that leadership demands ethical clarity, and that society thrives when citizens actively engage with the forces shaping their world. The drama, tension, and resolution of this episode leave a lasting impression, not merely as a political story but as a testament to the values of transparency, empathy, and moral responsibility. And as the final images fade from headlines, from tweets, from conversations around dinner tables and community centers, one truth remains clear: the real measure of a society is not in the power it wields abroad, but in the clarity, integrity, and courage it exhibits at home. The audience, now more informed and more inspired, carries forward the lesson that vigilance, empathy, and critical engagement are not optional, they are essential. In this way, the story closes, leaving viewers with both dramatic satisfaction and the uplifting sense that their attention, discernment, and participation can influence the arc of history itself. The world had reacted. The rumor had threatened panic. The Pentagon had stepped forward, asserting calm. Social media had erupted and then reflected. Civilians, experts, and allies had engaged. And through it all, the story revealed a deeper truth. Heroism is not always explosive. Sometimes it is measured, clear, and principled. Villainy is not always overt. Sometimes it masquerades as rumor, fear, and chaos. The audience, empowered and enlightened, is left to navigate the currents of truth and perception, understanding that in every story, every headline, and every rumor, there exists an opportunity for discernment, engagement, and moral clarity. And in that understanding lies both drama and inspiration, a call to action that transcends politics and touches the very essence of shared responsibility. The echoes of the story ripple forward. Americans, united by the awareness of how narratives shape reality, become not just observers but participants in the ongoing story of their nation. They see that heroism lies in truth-telling, vigilance, and civic engagement. They recognize that rumor, unchecked, can become a formidable antagonist. They understand that their own actions, sharing verified information, questioning narratives, and advocating for ethical governance, matter profoundly. In this awareness, the story finds its ultimate resolution. Drama gives way to reflection, tension gives way to understanding, and fear gives way to empowerment. The 10,000 troops may never have been deployed, but the lessons of discernment, empathy, and civic responsibility resonate far beyond any battlefield, reaching into the hearts and minds of every citizen willing to engage with both courage and conscience. The narrative concludes with clarity and inspiration. The audience has witnessed tension, conflict, escalation, and resolution. They have seen heroism in measured truth and villainy in rumor and fear. They have experienced the emotional peaks of anticipation, anxiety, and relief. And they are left with a moral and civic charge: to engage critically, to value truth, to uphold integrity, and to recognize that the power of informed, empathetic citizens shapes the destiny of a nation. The story, dramatic, cinematic, and deeply human, is complete, but its impact endures, inspiring viewers to act, reflect, and participate in shaping a world where clarity, ethics, and dignity triumph over chaos and fear.